All right, so good morning to you. Good morning to everybody. I'm happy that actually our dear guests of this and participants of this summit came. We had a long night at the Swedish embassy yesterday with a lot of talk and a lot of networking. So I'm happy that many of us are here today and many others will be still coming. So as you know, we will spend next approximately 30 minutes till 9:30 with Madam Speaker, Markéta Pekarová-Adamová. She is the Speaker of the Chamber of Deputies, which is the main chamber of the Czech Parliament, which actually the Czech government is accountable to. So the Czech government coalitions are formed out of majorities in the Czech Chamber of Deputies. Why I'm saying it is that actually when there is a majority, it could actually support very strong strategic decisions, such as, for example, visiting Taiwan or doing important political steps related to the issue of Hungarian government's influence in Central Eastern Europe. So that's something what is very significant. And Madam Speaker actually leads one of the coalition parties in the Czech ruling coalition, which is important. So it's not just symbolic what she says. She represents the Czech government coalition. And as you could imagine, there's a lot of sensitivities related to all issues we discuss here. So sometimes it's easier for those in the leadership of the parliament to speak while those in the government need to do, but maybe sometimes not say that much publicly. But this panel is on the record, it's public, so please feel free to share and to tweet anything you want. But I would just welcome Madam Speaker here. I'm so happy that you are here with us. Thank you.
Thank you. Good morning. Thank you.
And if I may get you seated here, and we would hear from you first, and then we have time for Q&A, questions, answers from you.
Thank you, Jakub. Ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues, ambassadors, happy to be here, and I'm very glad I had opportunity to talk to you. First of all, I would start with some notes and then we have time to discussion. Malign influence operations and the hybrid threats coming from revisionist powers are extremely important topics, and I want to start by thanking you all for your dedication to fight them. The Russian aggression has changed the context of the debate. Hybrid threats have now become more visible and tangible. One example is the increase of your recent energy invoice. It is a missile of Putin's hybrid war exploding right now in your living room. But energy is only one of the many fronts where we are being attacked. This new critical context is an opportunity to boost our resilience. And I'm glad that our current ruling coalition is taking important concrete steps in the right direction. In the first weeks of the war, the government has appointed a coordinator for countering disinformation, Mr. Michal Klima, who is with us today. And he and his team are responsible for the coordination of strategic communication. Together with the Ministry of Defense, they are drafting a plan for strategic communication systems. Furthermore, Stratcom teams are also being established at other key ministries. I consider the fight against disinformation and hostile propaganda particularly important. We must have a tool to switch off or decrease reach of websites that are being used for this purpose. The Ministry of Interior will soon submit a piece of legislation that would provide us this exact ability. I should also mention the positive role of the police investigators and judiciary. Some prominent disseminators of hostile propaganda have recently been sentenced, which is for us very important. I think very good example for other investigators. As for the other areas of hybrid warfare, we must not underestimate the power of malign economic influence. But we are also progressing on this front. The Ministry of Trade and Industry has a dedicated team working on an investment screening mechanism that would protect us from dubious investors linked to dictatorial regimes. But what if they go through EU-based companies? This is something we have to work on in partnership with our EU allies. The Czech Republic has been very active in the area of cyber security. The dangers which are in this space must not be underestimated as well. Just recently, when two committees of the Chamber of Deputies passed a resolution labeling the Russian regime as a terrorist one, the Chamber service came under a DDoS attack. Coincidence? Of course not. You should find on Telegram screenshots where they are planning this cyber attack to the Chamber of Deputies. The good news is that this attack was anticipated and curbed by the Czech security services. These are just some of the most important examples of what is being done in our coalition. On a more general level, let me stress two main priorities. One, we really need to work on our strategic culture. Although decision makers have an important role in this, although other stakeholders also have to play their part. Which brings me to the second priority, better coordination. I'm not just talking about coordination between ministries and the government institutions, but coordination with universities, research institutions, or think tanks. Of course, with respect to their independence and freedoms. In concrete terms, establishing the National Security Advisor at the Prime Minister's office is a crucial step in this regard. Before I finish, let me briefly elaborate on the geopolitical aspect. It is understandable that in recent months, our focus has been on Russian threats. But Russia is not the only danger. We must not underestimate other threats, such as China. While it sounds obvious to everyone here, it is less so for some of my colleagues in the Czech Parliament, not to mention some of my colleagues in the European countries. There are countries in our neighborhood that are not only underestimating the Chinese and Russian threats, they actively enable them. And I think I do not need to mention some of them, you know very well. We have to work with like-minded partners across the world, from the Indo-Pacific region to our friends on the other side of the Atlantic. Our rule-based international order is our strength, and so our best defense against these revisionist powers is to cooperate together to uphold it. Lastly, I would like to share my personal experience from recent visits to Moldova and to Western Balkans. Our partners there are facing very serious threats from Russia and its proxies. So while we focus on our own resilience, we also have to keep in mind the more vulnerable countries in our close vicinity. I know that this is a long list of homeworks. However, I see a great level of motivation, not only here among the experts, but also among my coalition partners. On this optimistic note, let me stop here and pass the floor back to you, and I wish you not only all the best in your work, but if you are not based in Prague, enjoy this stay in Prague as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Thank you. So let me ask the first two questions and then open it to the audience. So my first question goes obviously to the issue of Hungary, because you are publicly very vocal about how critical you are, as many other European politicians, about the role which the Hungarian government plays in support of Russian war against Ukraine. So could you maybe elaborate what you see now as crucial for you when you look into how the Hungarian government is acting in this region?
Yeah, thank you, Jakub. This is my very favorite topic. Everybody knows in the Czech politics, so sometimes I'm a very They are very critical to me because I'm naming the problem, and to name it is the first step when we want to solve it. So I think this is very important that Hungary is behaving as a Trojan horse of Russia right now among EU and NATO countries. And we should really be very aware of what's happening and about all the Hungarian influence in Western Balkans as well, in Serbia, for example, but as well in Bosnia and Herzegovina. There were 1 month ago there were elections in Bosnia, and in one part of the Bosnia there was running Dodik again and was supported by Hungary, and these are concrete steps we can see not only within Hungary but as well in their neighborhood. So for us it's important to first name it, to know about what's happening there, and I try to do it which is in my power right now to affect it. So we had, for example, and with as well European values, thank for it, great opportunity to talk to independent journalists, NGOs and NGOs activists from Hungary in Czech Parliament, Chamber of Deputies. So I invited them and made round table or kind of hearing with them. And this was as well the opportunity for example, ambassadors and politicians to really have the interaction between people who live in Hungary, who knows very well what's happening there. And I really recognize that many people don't know. There is not such a focus on this topic, and people really are not informed what's happening. So this is first thing I think is necessary to know, and then to work with. From the European level, of course, there is a great job done, but on the other hand, we have to keep using our tools and this pressure, and I think as well to support all media which are not controlled by government, and support them to be able to still bring objective facts and reports and so investigate in Hungary. So there are concrete steps we can do, because I don't think the result should be Hungary out of EU. No, I think we need to keep them, but to support the change in the country.
Are there any practical steps you are planning, if I may ask, related to Hungary, for example, in the future?
My practical steps are that I'm very vocal. I talk about a lot. I try to use my influence in this topic, and then I as well try to make other support to, as I mentioned, because what's inspiration for some of my colleagues, speakers of parliament, is that we are making these hearings and so on, so they can as well, because it's open for everybody, so it's important to continue in it. And for example, this month there should be in Bratislava V4 meeting of speakers of parliament, and I'm not going, of course, because I don't want to sit around the same table with Speaker of Hungarian Parliament. But we will send our my vice president of the chamber, Olga Richterová, who is really dedicated in the topic as well. And I can say that as well Polish speakers, because I recently been in Poland, are not going there as well. So this is a sign how we would like to, continue in before.
Like send a political signal of basically political boycott in a way. Okay, thank you for that. My second question goes to Taiwan, because it's publicly known and you declared it that you are planning to visit Taiwan sometime next year. Could you share with us what's your plan? Why are you going? What made you decide to plan and go to Taiwan? Because it's unusual. European speakers of parliaments usually don't go to Taiwan if they are not from the Czech Republic.
If they are not Miloš Vystrčil, who were. And as you said before, it's for us on a parliamentarian level easier to make these steps, easier than for government. And we cooperate with government, with Minister of Foreign Affairs, Honza Lipavský, in this topic as well. So this is a step which will show our support to Taiwan. This is the first thing. And the second thing, because we have economical ties, we would like to strengthen them. We would like to take businessmen and entrepreneurs and make these ties more maybe useful in the future. So this is as well the important part of our planning visit to Taiwan. And we, of course, have ties not only when it comes to business, but as like-minded democratic countries, we have to show our ability to cooperate in the political level as well. So this is the reason.
Thank you very much. Now we have about 6-7 minutes of your time, so I would like to open the floor for any questions, or if there are some. I see one here, so maybe can we get a mic so everybody can hear well? And please, if you can briefly introduce yourself.
Thank you so much. Daniel Hegedűs, German Marshall Fund of the United States. Thank you, Madam Speaker, for bringing up the topic of the threat posed by the Orbán regime of Hungary to the Western alliance system. One thing that, among others, protected this regime from potential sanctions imposed to democratic backsliding over the past couple of years was Central European solidarity. And my question would be, what would be your advice to the Czech coalition government if there will be a voting in the Council in December under the conditionality regulation about imposing potential financial sanctions on the country? I understand that your position is absolutely independent from the government ones. I am just curious what would be your advice. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yeah, my advice would be to vote for. So to support this, because I really think that it's important to work on it all the time in many possible ways, and I really think that it's necessary to keep the pressure they are under. And I'm convinced that we can see two faces of Viktor Orbán. One is for internal public, which is always blaming EU and Brussels for everything, and one is in the Brussels when he comes to all the meetings and summits. He is different in that way, and we of course have to support the media in Hungary, which are showing this two faces, and which are as well showing what's happening when it comes to corruption and how corrupt the system is. Because I think people will be able to act after they will see that money which are for their country, to improve their economy and their country, they are quite often stolen. And this is important, what is making the difference, I think. Because, for example, right now there are protests in Budapest and other cities, but mostly in Budapest. But as I heard, all the media under control of government, they are not covering these protests. And this is important to bring this information to people out of Budapest, out of the capital, and in all the regions to cover these topics. And the same is with many other topics, for example, sanctions.
Thank you very much. I see a next question there from Rebecca Harms from Germany. Please.
Good morning. Thanks for these interesting insights in what's going on in between here, Prague and Budapest. I would like to know, as a former member of the European Parliament, working for many years on these issues, how to deal with rule of law issues not only in Eastern Europe, for example, also in Italy and Spain. But what do you think about the results of sanctions towards Poland recently taken in context of the recovery program? And after what you said, so the Visegrad group was not always something I liked, but what I recognized a long time ago is there was a need for a strong coalition among those member states who joined the European Union in 2004. So regarding what goes on with Hungary, from your point of view, what's the future? So which alliance will come up with strong ties when it's necessary towards Brussels?
Thank you. Visegrad 4 is right now in a tricky situation. 3 of the countries are supporting Ukraine in their fight. They are fighting for us. I know it sounds like a cliche, but we have to repeat it and not to get used to this, because this is the truth. And the one country, so we are 3+1. One country is even not letting transport of weapons through their country, and supporting Putin and going to Moscow to ask for gas. So I'm quite sure we can overcome only if we will continue with new generation, let's say, new generation of politics who will overcome this this attitude and who will change it. Because right now it's much better for us to keep cooperation with Poland and Slovakia, and I think Slovakia as well. Sometimes we can see some signs that this would be not easy to keep this direction in their country. So I don't want V4 as a troublemaker within EU. I don't want to continue in this attitude which was for many years, and I think that there are other allies in our close vicinity, let's say Baltic states are very like-minded. As well, we have Slavkov format, which is with Austria and Slovakia. We are working on it as well. We should maybe be more cooperating in other things that we started. So I really believe we can in the future be again allies, but what's necessary right now to keep pro-Western and democratic governments in our countries, because we all are facing, of course, these attempts to all these protests in, for example, in Prague, of pro-Kremlin opinion makers, let's say, who are organizing them, and we have to keep pro-Western approach of our societies as well. We all are in challenging times, and when it comes to Poland, I was in Poland yesterday. I came back, and I think that all economical struggles will push them to make changes, because they need the money. This is what works.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. Being conscious of your time, I would like to thank you for your remarks and for the things which you announced here on the record as well, related to Hungary and Taiwan. So I think that's a great future for a lot of months to come. And thank you very much for your time.
Thank you. Thank you for your invitation.
Yeah. 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 Děkuji. And now the next panel will continue going on right now in a second. Thank you. Ještě no? Jo, to mohu uvést teď, jo? Tak můžu? So in a few seconds, you will actually hear from the Vice President of the European Commission, Věra Jourová, who is representing the European Commission, but she comes from the Czech Republic, and she and her team are very much, I would say, the EU policy leaders on issues related to disinformation and regulation of the social media or platforms as well. So there is a strong Czech footprint into it, and the Vice President will speak about it only distantly for us, and then we'll have a discussion of experts about this topic as well. So in a second, she'll be here online. Yes.
I am very glad to address you, the representatives of democracies from around the globe. There is no doubt that democracies all over the world are under threat. The enemies of democracy want to undermine our common values, our rights and freedoms. One of the weapons in their arsenal is disinformation. After Russia's aggression on Ukraine, we are all witnessing a weaponization of disinformation as a constant feature of the global information space. Dehumanization of Ukrainians, blaming democracies for the increased food insecurity and high gas prices, or justifying war crimes. This is well-documented daily bread and butter of the pro-Kremlin media outlets, and since the war, also the social media accounts of official authorities. Disinformation is not new, but with the digital revolution, disinformation actors gained new powerful online tools. Malicious actors intentionally manipulate the information space and platform design features to undermine free speech. So mitigating these vulnerabilities means to strengthen free speech and related fundamental rights. The challenge is to find a democratic response to an authoritarian weapon, and to do it fast. In the EU, we have designed a comprehensive response in the European Democracy Action Plan. It is a mix of legislative and non-legislative actions aimed at the platforms, the governments and the civil society. Now the Russian war has accelerated everything. We are in a crisis communication mode, and we should adjust our methods. Strategy communication is a key instrument to put facts into information space. Our goal is that the citizens have the chance to know what is happening. They have a chance to make up their own mind. In the EU, the Russian propaganda is very strong, tailor-made in many different languages. We have to understand it and respond appropriately. We have to realize where our weak points are and explain to the people who have doubts that it is Putin's regime responsible for the current situation. In a contested information space, it is important that we set out our position and fill the public space. Ensuring citizens have access to timely and accurate information about what the EU is doing to address the crisis is absolutely key. From corporate communication campaigns to political communication, social media content and actions to tackle disinformation, we are pursuing this goal in the priority areas. Of course, our priority is Europe, but we cannot focus only here. The perception may be different elsewhere: Middle East, Africa, Latin America. Yet, to defend democracy globally, we have to ensure that our messages are heard loud and clear globally. Efficient strategic communication is an important element in combating manipulation, and it goes hand in hand with the attempts to minimize the impact of false narratives. We need all hands on board to protect our democracies. I wish you a successful conference.
Okay, hi, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Lenka Strozinska, and I would like to introduce my colleague Martin Brezina, who's a senior analyst of Gerulata Technologies from Slovakia. He will give you a brief presentation about a project we were running. It's called Communicating Defense in Slovakia and the Czech Republic, mapping actors and narratives online. After that, we will have our first panel of the day. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Martin Brezina. I'm from Gerulata Technologies, and I would like to tell you something about who are the actors who write about defense on social media in Slovakia and Czech Republic. I want to show you something. So this is a snapshot of Slovak and Czech infospheres. It is only a snapshot because this image was generated as part of our project, which you can read a little bit more about in this publication. It will be distributed throughout the venue, and you can find it in front of this hall. And and it sort of shows all the actors who are communicating defense. Here's the same picture, but in green are the most effective defense-related actors. We have had a look at all of the green ones. And we have manually annotated them and looked at what their themes were, what their geopolitical sentiment was. Now, do you want to guess which one's Slovakia and which one's Czech Republic? So those of you who think that Slovakia is the larger one, please raise your hands. Okay. Those of you who think that Czech Republic is the larger one, raise your hands. Now, you would be wrong, because indeed Slovakia is the larger one than Czech Republic. As you can see, Slovakia is much more spread out. It has more distinct clusters of actors than Czech Republic, which is smaller, more dense, and has one large cluster. I'll talk about why that is a little bit later. But first, I want to show you what kind of actors we looked at, and also what were the what kind of cluster, what a cluster might look like. So this is an interesting cluster, I think, because it was found only in the Czech data set. Not it was to be found nowhere in Slovak in a Slovak network graph. It is so-called Czech military cluster. So what's interesting here is that there is this a cluster in the middle with the usual suspects you can very much expect. So the Ministry of Defense, military police, there's special ops, various military battalions that have their own social media presence on Facebook and other platforms, or the Army Recruitment Office. So this is the main part of the cluster. And connected to it, but not directly within the cluster, are actors such as City Police Cluster or Fire and Rescue Department. Now, all the green nodes, all the actors we looked at and analyzed their content in and especially the one that is the posts that are defense related. What this slide implies is that Czech Republic and Czech Army is doing a reasonably good job at strategic communication, especially when compared to Slovak Republic, at least. But this was not the only thing that we looked at. So we also looked at sentiments, and so this is the same graph, but just divided horizontally, because that's how it turned out. And one of these graphs, so on the right side you can see Czech Republic, on the left side is Slovak Republic, and but one of these is anti-Western and the other is pro-Western. So do you want to guess which one's anti-Western? Those of you who think that the top one is anti-Western, please raise your hands. Okay. Those of you who think the bottom one is anti-Western, please raise your hands. Right, so the second group would be indeed right, because anti-Western, this is what it looks like when it's put together. So, as you can see, Slovakia on the left, Czech Republic on the right. It looks, when you look at it, it looks pretty horrific, at least to me. Slovakia has a very strong, even dominant anti-Western cluster. The sentiments are there. It goes all the way to mainstream politics. Someone at this conference the other day said that Slovakia is a little bit wobbly. So this is an image of what this wobbliness might look like. So there are things, so some of the clusters here is a Telegram cluster, which in Slovakia is some sort of safe haven for people who are banned on Facebook. They go to Telegram, and this is the way they communicate. And it was this Slovak Telegram cluster was so strong that it attracted some of the Czech telegrams to it. So this is a mixture, perhaps, but it is, as you can see, it is within the within the Slovak cluster. There is a Russian-speaking cluster, so Russian-speaking media, Russian embassy, these sorts of things. And the way the information often flows is from the Russian cluster, because Russian-speaking content is very widely spread on Telegram. It goes from Russian Telegram or Russian news media through Slovak Telegram and into the wider social media networks like Facebook and these sorts of things. And there is, of course, in Slovakia, a very strong and very visible far-right political cluster. On the other side, there is, of course, the already mentioned Czech military cluster, and there are the communists and SPD. Right, and so I guess there are 2 points here. Czech Republic does not have such a big problem with anti-Western, so that's what we sort of found as big a problem with anti-Western sentiments and narratives as Slovakia. And the other is that Slovakia, the amount of anti-Western narratives and sentiments in Slovakia is outrageous. And to sort of hammer my point, to sort of show you the scale, I've prepared this slide. So you might know these 2 gentlemen. On the left is Mr. Blaha, who has been banned on Facebook a couple of months back because of his content, clearly. And on the right side, and he's Slovak, for those of you who don't know him. On the right side is the most effective Czech politician on social media, Mr. Okamura. We looked at the average interactions for February 2022. These are not only defense-related posts, these are all the posts that these 2 gentlemen published. So average interactions for Mr. Blaha in Slovakia, mind you, Slovakia is a significantly smaller country, the average interactions were over 14,000. For Mr. Okamura, it was around 6,000 in the same time period. I think I've had a number of followers somewhere here. It disappeared. I'll tell you if it's not here. So I will tell you. Mr. Blaha has perhaps half the followers. Well, before he was banned, anyway. He had half the followers of Mr. Okamura. So what this means is that Mr. Blaha has 4 times as large, or had 4 times as large interaction rate as Mr. Okamura. And so this is looking at all the posts. When we looked at defense-related posts only, this division was even larger. So it was perhaps 3 times as many interactions on defense-related posts in February 2022. One last thing, in Gerulata we have recently launched a politics social for Czech Republic. So you can see different, there are some dashboards and you can compare interactions for different political parties. But what I wanted to show you is the level of Mr. Okamura, so how well performing he is. So in the past 3 days, he had 3 times as many interactions as Mr. Babiš. Whereas Mr. Babiš, of all the presidential candidates, is leading in terms of interactions by a large margin as well. Now I want to tell you something a little bit more about the project that we've done. So the time frame, we looked at a time period of between August 2021 until July 2022. We have manually annotated over 10,000 posts, and we looked at things such as actors. So what kind of actors are they? Are they mainstream or alternative media, influencers, political actors? We looked at sentiment, the one I already mentioned. So are their posts anti or pro-Western, anti or pro-Russian, anti or pro-Czech Republic? And the last thing that we looked at were narratives. So what are the most common themes when these actors were communicating in defense? Unsurprisingly, it would be the invasion of Ukraine. Here you can see a graph on a timeline, and this is the distribution of all the posts that we annotated in time, and indeed this is the Russian invasion. You might be wondering what the defense-related means. Because I've been mentioning it quite a lot in this presentation. So we have created a Boolean query where we looked for things such as defense, army, or an attack. And indeed, not all of this vocabulary is necessarily related only with defense. There could be things such as personal attacks, so we have filtered those things out so that we are sure, so we ensured that we only have relevant content. The project was a cooperation between these 3 organizations, my very own Gerulata Technologies, Adapt Institute from Slovakia, and your European Values. It was overseen by NATO Stratcom Center of Excellence in Latvia, and it was financed by this fine institution as well. And before I go, I have 2 more announcements. So, firstly, here we have brought some of the reports, these thick booklets. You can take them; they will be in front of this distributed around the venue. You can take them; they are free, they are freshly baked, and they are not yet on the NATO Stratcom website. So you might have a peek before they publish it as well. And another thing. In the afternoon and at 1 o'clock, we are running a parallel roundtable for all those of you who might be interested. As far as I'm concerned, there are still some free spots. So if you would be interested in a longer presentation about the project and then discussion, please talk to Lenka, and I'm sure she will sign you up. Thank you very much for your attention.
One more chair. No. I'll bring you one chair. So thank you, everyone. I think we are ready to start with the next panel. My name is Veronika Víchová. I'm the Deputy Director of the European Value Center for Security Policy, and it's my pleasure to moderate this upcoming first discussion panel of today. In the following 60 minutes, we will be discussing strategic communication and its effectiveness in combating disinformation. Let me just start by saying that, to me, as a representative of civil society in the Czech Republic, strategic communication is somewhat of something like a mythical beast to me, because already since 2015, 2016, we have been largely advocating for our government to establish strategic communication design and principles, and to follow the good example, for example, the Baltic countries or the UK. And it hasn't been happening for a really long time. We even started this conference in 2016 and called it Stratcom Summit, which I think we haven't even realized how progressive that was for the time. But it took many, many more years, and it took COVID-19 pandemic, and it took full-scale invasion of Russia to Ukraine for our government and other ones to realize that this is actually an important thing that we have to establish, that we have to operate with, and that strategic communication is not just some vague word, that it's an actual necessity if we want to keep our society informed, resilient against hybrid threats, disinformation, and other threats that we are facing today. And today, I think this is a very unique position for us, because for the first time, our government and Slovakian government and other Central European governments actually realize that this is a problem, and they haven't necessarily solved it already, but we are at least making some progress. And I'm really happy that I can welcome today Henry Collis, the Deputy Director of National Security Communications from the UK, who basically served as one of the great examples in Europe how strategic communication can be done. And we all know that the UK also has been training other countries in how to do Stratcom well, including the Czech Republic, and we're very grateful. I would also like to welcome Mr. Michal Klima, Special Representative for Media and Disinformation of the Czech Republic. I would like to welcome Daniel Milo, the Director of the Center for Countering Hybrid Threats at the Slovak Ministry of Interior. And last but absolutely not least, I would like to welcome Sonia Koshkina, member of our Information Defense Hub and a great expert from Ukraine. You are the representative of civil society and media here, basically.
Media, yeah.
And I would very much like to also include this into the conversation today. There are many questions I would like to tackle. I would like to start by simply asking you, so I already mentioned we have been advocating for Stratcom for a really long time, that it's important. And since now we are in the phase where all of our countries are actually doing it, have we been right? Is it actually effective to fight disinformation with strategic communication? Do you have any good or bad example of this from your own environment? And then I would like to go more into specifics later on. So maybe I would like to start with Daniel. Could you please start from your example in Slovakia?
Thank you, Veronika. It's great to be here in Prague, and we have a wonderful day ahead of us, not only in this meeting room, but also hopefully outside. When I was walking here in the morning, I'm really glad to be in such a wonderful audience, meeting friends all than new. But let me maybe start by saying a couple of words about what we do at our center and why I consider the effective, the title of the session says, how can effective Stratcom combat disinfo? So I will focus on this element, and then we'll go on with the discussion. So our Center for Countering Hybrid Threats is a relatively new analytical center set up at the Ministry of Interior, because essentially Slovak government realized early on that we have huge deficits in monitoring, analyzing, and countering malign foreign influence by state and non-state actors. And therefore, such a specific structure has been created at Ministry of Interior. And similar structures have been set up at Ministry of Defense, at Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and Government's Office. Each of them, operating within their own, competencies regulated by the law. So what we do, we are not communicators. I have to say it at the very onset of this discussion. Our main task is to provide analytical feedback and support to other communicators within the ministry, police force, but also more broadly, other state institutions communicating to our citizens. And early on, when I started the job in January, my first realization was that basically we have no data. We do not measure how effective our communication is. We don't have data analytics capabilities. We do not collect public opinion polls. We do not know how people react to our communication other than, measuring the number of likes and shares, which is, very kind of shallow way how to measure the effectiveness. And therefore, one of the first things that we have started to do, we started to collect and analyze metrics across all the different, social media that Ministry of Interior operates on. And, just to realize that there are tens of accounts on Facebook of many different units within the ministry, and there is no coherent approach to communication was a major kind of revelation to me that there has to be a much more structured approach how we as a whole, as a ministry, communicate. Then what we did second was to do a meta-analysis of public opinion polls. In my former role in GlobSec, where I used to work for 6 years, I was actually heading a Stratcom program. So again, we've been progressive even before the Stratcom became the buzzword. But therefore, I know how important public opinion polls are. Because yes, we can look at the Facebook or the Twitter or Instagrams as much as we want, but what really matters is the impact. How impactful those narratives of either pro-Russian actors or our own communication actually is. And from my perspective, the best way how to actually measure the impact is to combine both. Look at the data analytics and look at the public opinion polls. And therefore, we started to collect and analyze all the available public opinion polls over the course of last couple of years. And there are already some interesting insights into the vulnerable groups of population, how certain narratives are trending and influencing people's attitudes. And last but not least, we also did a semantic analysis of our own communication, which again is not maybe very often done by any state institutions. And we have hired external experts who helped us with the semantic analysis, basically in what context we present particular issues. What are the word clouds that are most frequently used. And last but not least, increasing cooperation. That was, again, something that was very obvious to me because of my NGO role as an analyst, that there was a complete lack of structured cooperation among different ministries, among different entities. So let's say the government's office was communicating something and the other ministries did not even know about it, and there was no coordination about the themes, the main narratives, the topics, and so on and so forth. This finally started to change, and we are in a process of developing like a nationwide communication strategy, also kind of information gathering and analytical system which should cover the whole country. And now I would like to conclude these opening statements with one practical example. I have even brought a copy. Unfortunately, it's in Slovak, but we have it available in English. And it's an analysis, a very recent one from September, of a Russian information operation in Slovakia, which was basically busted because of very successful and effective strategic communication. And just to really give you a very short version of this report, in September 2022, Russian embassy in Slovakia published a post about an alleged destruction of a Russian cemetery in one small town called Ladomirova, where the soldiers from World War I, some of them Russian, some of them non-Russian, are buried. And basically they create a huge scandal how it is possible that graves of Russian soldiers are being destroyed by bulldozers in Slovakia. And obviously, immediately, a whole group of pro-Russian actors jumped on this narrative, and they started, to spin it, and so on and so forth. However, our police force, which, just for information, has the largest and the most effective social media account of all the state institutions, immediately reacted, like within a couple of hours. They contacted the mayor, they get all the facts together, and they debunked this story. Because first and foremost, there was no destruction, there were no bulldozers. What the mayor of the town did, he just removed the concrete like railings around the grave, so there was no desecration whatsoever. Yet, Russian embassy continued in their attempt to spin the story, but because there was already an existing system of coordination between police, Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Ministry of Defense, basically we managed to stop the Russian narrative and to get our message across in a matter of days. And just very last sentence, when looking at the data and the analytics, there was a series of posts by the Slovak police and other institutions. We managed to reach 1.5 million viewers with these stories in a country of 5 million. So you could see how effective the counter narrative and the strategic communication was in this particular case. And this for me is a clear proof that if things are done correctly, if there is a coordinated approach and a fast, very I think the time is really of essence here. If the reaction is fast, it's accurate, and it's coordinated across different institutions, we can effectively stop and derail Russian attempts to influence our country with this particular narrative.
Thank you very much, Daniel. And with that, I would slowly move to Mr. Klima. I think it would be really interesting if you could also maybe tell us how can we compare towards the Slovakian system? How are we doing? Do we have maybe similar existing or planned measuring of our communication? Are we already able to coordinate amongst institutions, or are we only on the way towards such a state?
Okay. Well, thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Does it work? Yeah. Thank you for having me here. I would just add to your words. On the beginning, you said that there were two matters which happened to start strategic communication, COVID, and the war, Russian war against Ukraine. I would say that one more thing was needed, and it was election and new government, because under the previous government there were a lot of preparations, but everything started only with the new government. My position was planned or started. We started discussion just immediately after the new government was formed in December last year, and then it was created in March. And the Department of Strategic Communication started in the office of the Prime Minister in July, and we immediately started a campaign explaining the governmental help to people with the economic crisis, because Czech Republic, like other countries, is facing big problems with energies and with price increases and so on. So we are explaining to people how they can get help. So we had a big commercial campaign since starting in the mid of September. It lasts 6 weeks. And back to the organization. So our Department of Strategic Communication started in July, as I said, but they are also strategic communication department in other ministries, probably the same as in Slovakia, in Ministry of Interior, Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Ministry of Defense, and they are small departments also in some other ministries. And yes, we started coordination. The government asked me to coordinate the communication which is connected with the war and with the all matters which are connected from the side of the government, communication and so on. So that we have a system of meetings every month, and between also small meetings with other ministries. And we are coordinating this. We are just now preparing the action plan to fight disinformations, which we hope will be agreed by the government. I cannot, unfortunately, I cannot say, or I would be happy to say much more than what we already succeeded, but in the government, as probably many of us know, everything goes a little slower than it should. So we hope that it will be a lot of matters which I would be ready to report next year, but just now we are starting.
Okay, thank you. Maybe let me follow up with you, Sonia.
Yeah, sure.
So how effective do you think Stratcom is in combating disinformation, and how can media be part of Stratcom, either organically or more formally?
Yeah, I will speak from my practical point of view, because for a long time I am editor-in-chief and co-founder of one of the biggest Ukrainian online media, LBUA, and working as a journalist. So I have practical point of view and prepare a short report for our meeting. I won't have a possibility to present it. So first of all, as for me, we need to understand that strategical communication in the peacetime, in the wartime, it's absolutely not the same. It's absolutely different. In the first day of the great invasion in Ukraine, our parliament, Verkhovna Rada, adopted a special law, temporary law for wartime, which regulates all life in Ukraine, also media, also communication. And according to this law, it's possible to have a straight censorship, statement censorship for safety reasons. But the war is just nine months just now, and there no any state censorship in Ukraine, and believe me, it will be no exist, because it's a democracy country, and also we are fighting for it. So I try to, but a lot of really change, and I try to outline, as for me, the most interesting for cases. First of all, it's national telemarathon United News. In the first 2 days of Great Invasion, all big channels, TV channels, is one of the most popular media and a main source of information for Ukrainians, especially which are living not in the big cities. So big channels try to launch their own marathons. But it wasn't possible, first of all, reasons of safety. Sometimes signal is interrupted, sometimes studios sheltered. So at several days, our main channels decide to create one united telemarathon. It wasn't a state decision, it was their own decision, because it's a close business, everybody knows there for a long time, and but it wasn't impossible to predict 1 week ago that these people can communicate so close. They can really unite it to make one product. So national marathon, it's first of all, it's minimized risks. It's provide 24 air for Ukrainians, and it was very important in the first days of the Great Invasion, also according against Russian propaganda, against Russian IPSO, Information Special Operations. A single control center where is the final decision what to show, not what to show, who will be our experts. In our studio there were no such center. It was, as I mentioned, in close communication between all chiefs, editor-in-chiefs of this channel, and they decided themselves. And the base of United Marathon of Єдині новини, it a national TV channel Rada, it channel of Verkhovna Rada of our Ukrainian parliament. So in first several months it was very important and also have a huge role. But just now situation is another situation also in Ukraine, and it became a serious challenges for national marathon. According to this law, which I mentioned, national marathon will walk till the end of the Great Invasion, but just now, and we have financial for next year for this, but just now it's understanding that it's necessary to change format. It's what about TV. What about communication, Stratcom, communication center in the presidential office and between big media? At the first day, maybe at 2 hours after Great Invasion, I remember it very well, was created a special closed chat for editor-in-chief of Provide Media, and from one hand, and another hand, it's a communication team of presidential office. We have several goals. So to be, first of all, also to be honest, for me it was a surprise, because we cannot predict several days ago that we may be in so close communication with them. Which goals? First of all, we need, usually, we check all information we are preparing and giving for our readers and viewers. It's understandable, but here in this situation, it was very important to be sure in all sentences, and sure we need to everything. We have not so much time as in a peaceful time to check it. So it was a possibility to use government sources to check some information, some safety information, some information about field battles, and our governors, sorry, not governors, but our officials help us to do it. As an example, also against Russian IPSO. And as an example of Russian IPSO, as you know, they promised to invade Kiev for 72 hours. And in first several hours after beginning of Great Invasion, the Russian created a huge number, I don't know, maybe thousands of new Telegram channels, which informed, especially in Kharkiv region, in Mariupol, in Zaporozhye region, so on territories which they attacked. This Telegram channels informed that Kiev is occupied, Kharkiv is occupied, and one of our goals was to explain our readers also with possibilities of our media, online media, also with possibilities of TV marathon, Єдині новини, that it's not true. So for this, we need to be united, and we was united. One also interesting fact, as you maybe if you remember, 1st of March was attacked TV tower in Kiev, also in Zaporizhia, in Kharkiv, in Lugansk region, in Zhytomyr. It's also big cities. So it's a classical IPSO, because understandable that in 21st century it's not possible to destroy TV channel just by destroying, shelling in a TV tower, because you have signal, you have internet, but from psychological point of view, it's really important, and it was also classical IPSO. First journalist which died on this war, it was after shelling of TV center in Kiev, not far from Babi Yar. And last one for us, it's reasonable self-censorship, because it's a very popular question. If we have some censorship, it's self-censorship. It's absolutely understandable, because when you work as a journalist or editor-in-chief with some information about the war in another country, it's not the same to work with such a type of information when it's the war in your own country. So we are not only journalists, we are also citizens. We are firstly citizens. And a main reason not to do harm. Not to do harm, and sometimes we cannot ask some question, because we understand, for example, I have interview with head of our government, and I cannot ask him everything, because I understand that I have no response. So for what I need to ask, if I understand that he cannot give me a truth response. Is it means that it's self-censorship? Sure. Is it justified during the war? Sure, but it's, I'm absolutely also sure that also one popular question, is it possible to criticize Ukrainian officials during the war? Yes, sure. If you will check the biggest online media, you will see a lot of criticism of our government, but it's practical criticism, it's argumental criticism. So in conclusion, I understand that when we win this war, everything with a lot of will change also in communication, and we will use this experience. I hope, because Russian disinformation will exist also after the war, and I think we will discuss about it. So it's shortly about situation in Ukraine, how we communicate, working together, how media takes part in it.
Thank you. And last but not least, Henry. So could you also follow up on this and maybe give us examples from the UK how STRATCOM can be effective against disinformation, and maybe also tackle your activities via our countries, how UK has been training Czech Republic and other countries and how they can do their STRATCOM better.
Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you for name-checking the UK's efforts. I think it's important for us that we don't think about it as training. It really is exchange for us. And I think it's been at the heart of an approach that has focused on building networks. And I think if we want to pick out an example from my experience that the UK has been working on with our partners, it's the creation of these different networks and the way that those networks came into play ahead of the illegal invasion of Ukraine. As you mentioned, we've been working with numerous governments over the years, and I'm just, it's excellent to see the way that the system has changed. That's as a result of a conversation that's been taking place since organizations like European Values took those sort of early steps to enabling that conversation and bringing all of the right people together. And it's great that we can all still come together and talk about these things and hear about how things have changed. Everyone understood the ideas intuitively of what needed to happen, but as Daniel so expertly explained, the real challenge is how you bring those government departments together and break down those barriers, and that is involves overcoming a lot of inertia, a lot of institutional resistance to bringing people together, because governments work a certain way and they've developed in those ways for hundreds of years. So it becomes a big organizational change challenge inside government. But it's about building those networks of people that are highly motivated and highly capable and want to see that change happen, and bringing them together inside the system so that they can actually start to change it. And that's what I think has happened in many of the governments. And the UK government may have provided training, but what's happened is that people inside those systems have actually come together and made those changes happen within them. So that's networks inside the government. Building networks among those partners, linking all of them up so that they can actually have a live conversation as disinformation has targeted their countries. We've all been able to come together quite quickly and share that information through the conversations that we've set up. And that was very much the case in the run-up to the illegal invasion of Ukraine. We were having regular conversations with Czech Republic, with Slovakia, and partners all the way from the Black Sea to the Baltic to exchange information on how Russia was attempting to create false pretext for its invasion and rapidly coordinating what we would say in response. And that meant that it brought that element of speed to what was needed, so that the falsehood can be exposed and countered rapidly. And that's what was lacking in 2014. We didn't have that conversation. We didn't have those working level contacts between the people that were actually trying to counter what was going on. And we couldn't come together and expose it in a timely manner. And that caused enough sort of pause for the creation of ambiguity that the adversary could exploit. So I think the example that I would point to is the creation of those networks, the development of networks of individuals within the governments that have worked together on this, and of course that bigger network of the governments coming together.
Thank you very much. So next question I would like to ask all of you, and it might sound slightly basic for people who have been dealing with these issues for a long time, but I still think it's important to say it out loud. One of the issues regarding establishing STRATCOM units and STRATCOM processes is that it's a challenge to even communicate that to the public. there is often criticism of such units or such processes from various points of view. I mean, we in the Czech Republic have experienced blaming these units for censorship, for example, which even though we might know it's not true, many people still perceive it that way because it's difficult to explain. Sometimes it's also difficult to explain to the public what is the difference between Stratcom and governmental PR, marketing, or even governmental propaganda. So my question to all of you would be, how do you think it's best to deal with these issues in the communication way, how to explain that to the public, or how to set some kinds of checks and balances within the system to make sure that this does not happen? Because let's be honest, I think some of this criticism might be quite legit from the point of view that if we have a new government which maybe would like to abuse those systems, they might, if we don't have the right system in place. So I would like to know from all of your points of view how to, let's say, overcome these challenges, because I think it really is quite complicated, especially for people who are not specialists, to see how to deal with it. So can I also ask you to start?
My approach would be to base all those activities on a clear and transparently communicated set of values. So if we are setting up, let's say within our ministry, a Stratcom unit or any kind of a system that aims to support and strengthen the way that our government or our ministry communicates, it must be rooted in a system of values that should stay in place regardless of who is actually the sitting minister, theoretically. Well, this is kind of my approach, how I would formulate it. The problem comes if potentially there might be a government that is fundamentally opposed, let's say, to foreign policy orientation, or their position vis-a-vis war in Ukraine would be complete opposite of what the current government is. And in such a situation, even if we have this very transparent system of these are our values, and this is why we are protecting them from any outside force that tries to manipulate our society, instigate fear, instigate divisions, polarization, and so on and so forth. It might help us at least in the initial stage, but I believe that the greatest vulnerability in my own country would be if there will be such change of government, and there are some forces in the political opposition sphere that would like and would love to completely overturn the way that Slovakia, approaches the war in Ukraine, or, its relations to NATO, to US, to our Western partners. And it's not completely inconceivable that such a dramatic change might happen. I hope, very much hope, and we do all we can, to expose such, elements, because they're quite often linked to pro-Russian, sources, and there is basically a more or less hidden hand of Kremlin, guiding these efforts. So just by exposing these elements and these efforts, I hope that we will be able to counter and to forestall, any such attempt. But your point is, a very important one, because indeed, if we create a very effective Stratcom system, how to make sure that it's not actually abused by someone who just comes and grabs the system, grabs all the networks and data analytics, and just use it for their own purposes. Well, the case of Hungary was mentioned here in the previous session. It's a very sensitive topic, obviously, in Slovakia, because we have a sizable Hungarian minority, and historic relations between Slovakia and Hungary have been, to put it mildly, difficult at times, also in modern history. But nevertheless, Hungary for me is a kind of a warning sign, or a cautionary tale that there could be a highly effective system, yet guided by a completely different set of values, which I definitely would not like to see.
Great, thank you. Mr. Klima, can
well,
you
frankly saying, I don't feel high necessity to explain the necessity of strategic communication. What I feel is that we have to do it right way, because most of the criticism is intentional. I'm accused that I am the chief censor in the country, leading the censorship, although I have no any power to censor whatever, and of course not will to do it. you know, last government, the former government, which ended a year ago, was criticized for the chaotic communication about the COVID, and the criticism was correct because the communication was really chaotic. The current government is criticized that it doesn't communicate well the help to the people, as I explained previously. So the answer for it is that the government wants to do it well, and that's why the government created the Department for the Strategic Communication. So I think that much more effective than to explain all the time the necessity of it is to do it well.
But do you think that the current system as it is being established, that it will not be possible to abuse it by a different government in the future?
Yeah, it can be. Well, the government is government; it can abuse, but that's the democracy should work well. That the government cannot do it, but you know, everything can be abused if there is will of the government to abuse it.
Okay. What's your point of view, Sonia? Because you're more in the position of the media who would report on the efforts,
for
right?
me it's very shortly, because for me it's absolutely understandable that there is a huge difference between Stratcom, government communication. It's a system, it's an institute. It's absolutely, I cannot imagine a situation when in a democracy state it connect with some exactly persons in government. So it's separate system which need to work without independently who is just now is members of a government. And if we are talking about private PR of some ministers, members of parliaments, it's absolutely another story. So strategical communication, it's about some decisions, some activities, it's some important information for society. Private PR, it's private PR in all times, in all countries, for me, it's absolutely understandable.
Okay, and Henry?
Yeah, I think it varies between systems, and again, it comes down to the organizational culture of governments, and of course, you know, that's based on different values. But I think Daniel's first point is absolutely right from our perspective, clearly articulating the basis on which you are creating this system and how it's going to be used. I think from our perspective, it's in our system, I think it would be it's hard to imagine a situation where, you know, someone would use the system of government comms to, for example, spread their own or denounce their opponents or that kind of stuff because of the way the institutions are formulated and the checks and balances that we have in place. I think the values that we try and introduce as we counter disinformation or try and create an environment that counters disinformation aren't based on control, so there aren't those systems there that allow us there aren't the systems there that would allow for abusive activity. When we think about how we create an environment where disinformation can't thrive, we talk about things like media plurality, because disinformation thrives where there are not diverse media voices. So, you know, those are the kind of values that we try and maintain. It's not always to our benefit, and just by way of a quick anecdote, I remember going to explain to the head of government communications and the British ambassador in the relevant country that a media outlet had some information that was very inconvenient for the British government, and that we had indeed been supporting this media outlet with training and helping them, you know, supporting them in providing sort of independent, fact-based media in the relevant region, which may or may not have been the Baltics. And my point to them was, well, in many ways, this is actually an example of success for us, isn't it? Because we might have supported them, but the fact that they are acting as effective investigative journalists and using information to hold us to account, and we have to engage with them like a serious, credible media outlet, and that's sort of the approach that we take to that internationally.
Okay, I have one more question for you. the UK has quite a massive system of Stratcom, and we already mentioned that you have been also training or exchanging with other countries. Has it ever happened to you that you provided a country or a state civil service with advice or tips how to do it better, and the response was, but we have no money for that? Because UK is working with significantly different resources than Czech Republic or Slovakia does. So what can we actually do with this limited resource? I will ask you, gentlemen, as well then, how are you working with this, with these conditions? But is this something that ever comes up in these kinds of exchanges?
Yeah, all the time. And, I've worked with a range of different governments that are all at different levels of capability and have different amounts of resources available. All capability building, whether it's about strategic communications or training any other or developing any other facet of government or an organization, involves coming up with a solution that's fit for purpose. In UK government, we do a lot of work that we call no cost, low cost, and finding ways that you can actually channels that you can actually instrumentalize for communications that don't come with significant cost is part of it. In some instances, it's a case of making sure that, for example, the analytical tools that can be used at relatively low cost, or in some cases for free, are also being deployed. There's simple steps to start people on the journey to building a fuller strategic comms capability. I don't think it's never, it's never nice if the UK show up and showcase our Mercedes equivalent of a Stratcom system, if I'm being generous, because when you're inside these things, it doesn't always feel like a well-oiled German-engineered machine. But we show them what our system looks like, but it's not going to win anyone any friends if that's so far away from what's appropriate. So what we've learned to do is work with the environment that we're going into.
So, Mr. Klima, how do you sort of navigate with the limited amount of resources? And also, I would like you to tell us, if you lived in your ideal version of the world in a couple of years, what would the Stratcom actually look like in the Czech Republic in terms of resources, be it personal, financial?
Well, we really just now have limited resources, that's correct. And we intend to get higher resources for next year. I think it's very important because without resources you can do really nearly nothing. The situation in the Czech Republic is very specific concerning media, because we have very weak media. The most of the news media are owned by oligarchs nowadays, last 10 years. And we have a lot of new independent media which were started by journalists who left the media houses after they were acquired by oligarchs. And I think that the state should create a system of support of news media and of independent media, similar how it is in other Western countries. We have new law in Austria, for instance, which was accepted just a few weeks ago, of supporting of news media. And I think that that strong news media are the most important way how to fight with disinformation, because the situation just now is that simply the media freed the space for the disinformation. So my intention is to offer or to create a system how the government should support media without the media will lose its independence. And of course, a lot of other matters, as I said, we are just now preparing the action plan. I think there is a need of governmental education, media, much better media education. Just now, the media education is mostly done by non-governmental organizations. We have very good non-governmental organizations which really created a good system of media education, but it should be a role of the government and of course much more to be done. I can quote few points from what we are preparing in the action plans. Of course, also support. I spoke about the support of the media. The same is support of the non-governmental organizations which are fighting disinformation, because also in this field we have very strong and very good non-governmental organization. Of course, European values are one of them. We need to demonetize the disinformation scene, because the situation in the Czech Republic is that we have about 25 or nearly 30 disinformation outlets, websites which are spreading disinformation, and they are not owned by Russian government. They are owned by Czech people who are making business from it, and because their costs are very low, because they do not need to verify any information. They do not need to employ journalists. They simply spread disinformation, which they are in many times even translated by computer programs from Russian, and just spreading them. And they are making their business from advertising, because the advertising these days done by programmatic, so simply they put the space for advertising, and it's automatically feeded. So we want to, and some of this money is also coming from the government, because government is advertising. So we want at least to find a way how the governmental organizations and governmental departments will stop this kind of advertising. We need to find also legislative solutions, because when the war started in February, some of these disinformation outlets were stopped, and there were many complaints that there is no law how to do it. So I think that there should be a law which will state in what situation the government can stop such disinformation outlets. Of course, the big problem is our social networks, which cannot be solved in the one country itself. It must be the global solution. So I think that there is very important to cooperate in the level of the European Union and with European Commissions. So this all is how I would imagine the ideal situation.
Before I give the word to you on the same question, I would just like, Sonia, you to follow up, because Mr. Klima mentioned the support towards the media, and I was wondering if you could say what's your point of view on that, and also if there are any other ways that, besides financial support, how the government can support independent media in the country.
I also agree, absolutely support the idea of special education, media education, also for small children, because it's important to explain. I also see this question, maybe to predict my answer. It's absolutely necessary to give them a possibility to recognize fakes, to understand, to recognize headlines. It's also very important, especially in social media. To understand how to protect yourself from propaganda, not only Russian propaganda, Chinese propaganda, and other types of propaganda. Yeah, so it's not some current temporary situation for a long time. So we also need to fight for it for a long time. And if possible, to have some vaccine against propaganda and disinformation, yes, in criminal court. in criminal court, and we have international, criminal court, and we have such type of cases, like this case of Rwanda, when 3 heads of the most popular radio which support a genocide in Rwanda, it was editor-in-chief, owner, and I don't remember exactly who was the third, but they have a very long prison term, still from 33 to 55 years. And I think it's a good example because Russian propagandists, they absolutely use words as a weapon, and sometimes it's a more effective weapon, as a classical weapon. So Solovyov, Krasovsky, all another, they need to be in international court, and I hope that it will be.
Thank you. So Daniel, can you also follow up on how did you navigate the limited resources?
Yeah, I believe there are always resources. Governments collect taxes, and they every year, allocate, billions of euros, or depending on the size of the country and the budget and so on. So for me, it's more a matter of convincing the politicians, the ones who actually allocate, the state budget, how and why this particular issue should be given a sufficient level of attention and resources. And just to give you a very practical example, why I am sitting here as a head of newly established, analytical unit is the outcome of a several months-long process where we managed to convince Minister of Interior that it's really worthwhile to invest several millions of euros. We are speaking of millions of euros for a 2-year period to build capacities, acquire tools, create structures, and basically to have money available for countering hybrid threats, conducting Stratcom, conducting public campaigns, and so on and so forth. So there was a point in time when Ministry of Interior, even before the war in Ukraine started, that was like summer 2021, where yes, there were all these tensions, and we knew how impactful the infodemic was. We always have to remember, well, yeah, we are now all speaking about the war in Ukraine, and for all the good reasons, because this is the immediate danger, and we all know how important this fight is. But, tens of thousands of my compatriots, of Slovaks, died because of a direct effect of disinformation. They didn't get vaccinated. Some of them even rejected medical treatment even while being in hospital because they've been so, and pardon my French, brainwashed by all these conspiracy theories and nonsense. So, suddenly, after all these, horrible developments, the government and the Ministry of Interior, in this particular case, they realized, yes, we have to really do something, and there are European money. I didn't mention it, but, this particular pot of money comes from the EU funds. And now the question is, and it's a real question, how to ensure sustainability. Because in the past, I've seen many nice and well-looking pilot projects on many different, topics, which were then not followed up by state funding. And I believe this would be a really a key, let's say, decision, or a key crossroad, whether or not the state would say, okay, so we have been supporting this for 2 years. We have the structures, we have the system, we have, analytical capabilities, we have the software. And now comes the time when state has to set aside, a sizable amount of money just to continue doing this. The question is, how much money is really needed, and the number of people, and so on and so forth. But I see, this whole kind of exercise as a pilot phase. And if we manage to convince the government and, all the institutions that, yes, we do provide added value, our insight is really important, and yes, we do have the figures and numbers to show it, that it's much more effective, and then we are reaching groups of audience that haven't been even talked to before because we didn't know that they are vulnerable. I believe then, and well, I'm a realist, there might be other, things to consider, but I hope, at least I hope, that we will make the argument that yes, state has to set aside, a certain budget just to continue doing this because it would show that it's required, it's needed, and it's effective.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. So we have the last 5 minutes of this panel, and I have 2 more questions I would like to ask you. So I will request to be very brief in your responses. I think it will be possible. The first question is based on one posed by the audience, which asks, how do you target the bubble of hard believers of disinformation? So I would maybe adjust a little. Do you even mainly target hard believers of disinformation, or are you more targeting, let's say, this gray area of unsure people? And if yes, then what are the channels? And maybe I'll ask Daniel first, very quickly.
Yeah, basically you answered the question already. I would not even target the hard believers. You know, they are so deeply rooted in those beliefs that, you know, just by targeting them, I don't really think we'll be successful. So indeed, our strategy is to go for the gray zone, not for the convinced ones, but for those, well, we don't know where the truth is, and they try to kind of balance their information sources just to increase the share of narratives and the sources that are, you know, trustworthy, objective, and so on, and let themselves decide for themselves what to believe in. I wouldn't even bother, or I wouldn't focus so much effort and energy on the hard believers.
I can see everybody else nodding, so we can all agree on that.
Well, I can only add to that according researches, hard believers who, concerning Russia, they are in Czech Republic only 4%. Only 4% are hard believers in whatever Russia do. So it's luckily a very small group. And
it's 20%, unfortunately. It's 20-25% in my home country. You know, consistently, poll after poll, it's 20-25% of the population.
So I guess your main goal is to stop this number from expanding.
Exactly.
Yeah. So my last question, which I guess is an obvious one, but a very important one. So we are now in the beginning of winter. Energy prices, inflation, continuing war, potentially COVID, Ukrainian refugees, all of that is being used and abused by disinformation campaigns, by populists, by manipulations. People are being polarized. And we are facing, again, this several months of crises ahead of us. So my question to you is, how do you plan to survive the winter? To simplify it, please don't say dragons. I really don't want to go into any specific details. Just please tell me your, let's say, 2 or 3 priorities from your point of view. Sonia, maybe from you, I would like to say, what do you think should be our priorities?
I think that main priority is to explain for European societies, not only here in Czech Republic, because Czech Republic support Ukraine on very high level and all this time. To explain for your societies that it's not about, the reason is not in Ukraine. The reason is in Russia aggression against Ukraine. The reason is not only personally in Putin, but in whole Russia society which support it. I think it would to be a main narrative. Just all.
Thank you.
You asked to be briefly.
Yeah.
I believe the situation will be not so bad. The government made a lot to be prepared for the winter. Also, the weather is helping if you look outside of the window. So I believe that this winter, concerning the problem you mentioned, will be not so big problem.
When you have electricity, when you are not under the sheltering, when you have water, it's not hot winter, believe me.
I agree with you. I maybe, to rephrase a little bit, I meant really from the communications point of view, because the fact that we are not as bad as people in Ukraine doesn't mean that people are not discontent.
Yeah, sure.
I would suggest to be consistent in communication, again, repeating the narratives that Sonia mentioned, and maybe also highlighting the fact that at the level of EU, we were able to actually deal with the energy crisis by capping the prices, by, you know, finding alternative sources of you know, gas, LNG, and you know, other sources. So basically saying, keep calm and carry on, as our British colleagues say, yeah, we have solutions, we have measures in place, and you know, the real culprit is Putin and his cronies. It's not the Ukraine, it's not EU, it's Russia and it's their aggression, and yet we are managing quite well in, you know, kind of dealing with the crisis.
And Henry?
We've been polling we've been polling since before the invasion and checking in on our population's support for our policy and our support for Ukraine. the population have consistently maintained very high levels of support. We're obviously tracking their other concerns, and particular, as you've mentioned, sort of the sense that this might not be worth the cost if there's a hard squeeze over winter. And we're also sort of tracking that in the wider sort of Euro-Atlantic area to try and understand exactly how different populations feel about it. I think our core message in response to any concerns that do emerge, though, is that the cost of dealing with this now is less than the cost of dealing with it down the road. And if we don't stand up now, then we're going to have to pay a higher price in future. And that is our single clear message that we're going to stick to with our own population throughout the winter.
Thank you very much, and thank you to all of you for today's contributions to this debate. It was a pleasure, and well, enjoy the coffee break.
Thank you.
Thank you for discussion.
Thank you.
I've written Visegrad angle. So you do not strategic and Visegrad angle. Yeah, but you need to pick up from Martin Swarovski's thing. So it's Visegrad and strategic angle.
But actually, I think 5 briefers wouldn't even really fit here. I mean,
yeah, but you see, Martin is my. Okay. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I'm very happy to welcome you to this session, this roundtable, which will discuss the question how to deter Russia and fortify NATO East Flank. We have 3 splendid speakers. On my left, Matej Kendrick, who is the co-founder of the ADAP Institute, and he has been working on such issues for quite some time now. Since November 2022, he is also the Marcin Kroll Fellow at the Visegrad Insight. He will provide us with a strategic analysis and a Visegrad angle of the question. To his left, we have Lieutenant Colonel Yves Desbiens, who is a specialist. He's a field expert here, so we are going to have concrete explanations and analysis from the field. He's an officer who deals with military public affairs with the Canadian Armed Forces, and he's deployed in Riga at the Stratcom Center. And on his left, we have Barbara Maronkova, who is a Slovak born, actually, so welcome to Prague, working for NATO at NATO HQ, and she will provide us with a transatlantic institutional analysis of the question. Without further ado, let me move to our first speaker, Yves Desbiens. Mon colonel, you are able to give us your experience on the topic and provide us with field expertise. You've been involved with enhanced forward presence. Can you provide us with concrete examples of hostile operations? How have you been able to timely detect them and neutralize them? Is there room for improvement? What are the challenges? What are the conclusions that you can draw from your deployment and the last years of your work? The word is yours, and you have 7 minutes to convince us that we are winning, they are losing, and we are doing great.
All right, thank you. It's going to be a good 7 minutes. Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here. So I do believe we are winning. I'm going to start with the fact right now. Since COVID, we haven't been the target of any disinformation campaign from Russia and Latvia targeting specifically the battle group or the Canadians. So that speaks for itself. I think it shows that there's been a lot of good work done. And all of the work that we've done over the last 5 years, not only me, but my teams, my Latvian counterparts and so on, along with many other nations operating in Latvia, was to really get a greater understanding of the information environment. And that is what was lacking. And the Canadians got a good taste of it right at the beginning when we announced that we were going to deploy to Latvia. We were targeted right away with like aggressive Russian disinformation attacking Canadians, like plain up lies, accusing us of being rapists and gay and this and that we were going to go and kill people in Latvia and steal and so on. That was a really hard awakening for Canadians because we're pretty naive in that on that front, like meaning that we're not exposed to much disinformation back home. So in terms of that level. So when we got there, the main task was to really get a better understanding of what was going on in this information environment. And this is important to say that the tactics used by Russia are different from one country to another. Yes, there are broad teams attacking NATO, and they just like paintbrush everybody. It doesn't matter the country, the language, and so on. But when you start looking deeper and deeper, then we found that they are really attacking what is valued by Latvian, and not only in Latvia, but I'm speaking specifically to Latvian. For example, the environment is a key, something that is deeply cherished in Latvia. So guess what? They are active in all of the small chat, Facebook page, and so on, everything that has to do with the environment. And then they are conducting disinformation campaign as low at this level. So the economy is a very sensitive topic as well. So they are extremely active on that front. So to be more precise, I'll give you a concrete example. For those who know, Latvians, they love mushrooming. They like mushroom is a national sport. They're always out there in the forest, and I'm not kidding. They're almost fighting for their spot there. So guess what? We were also the target on mushroom picking group. Like Canadians were targeted, like destroying mushrooming sites with tanks and trashing and this and that. So we're like, come on, like, but if you and to draw a parallel with the higher headquarters, they don't track this level of detailed disinformation campaign at a low level. But this is really where the battle is happening. The high-level stuff, the average citizen, they don't care. They don't care hearing that, oh, NATO is not efficient and this and that. Like they couldn't care less. But when they see disinformation tactics saying that Canadians are trashing their mushroom remaining sites, like it gets picked up. So this is what we found after about a year and a half of really like getting like a deep understanding of what do everyone value within Latvia, and then you split the country furthermore, and then you have differences and nuances across the country. But tracking this, mapping it out was possible only with like a deep research, national surveys, all the work that the Stratcom SUI is doing and so on. But the most helpful data were the data that we collected there on the ground, like not studies conducted from like a third party remotely that doesn't understand the nuances on the ground. So eventually, this enabled us to stop being reactive to disinformation and moving from being reactive to being proactive and doing some pre-bunking. So instead of like, that's one thing to understand the environment and that's one thing to track disinformation. Now we knew what they were doing. We established patterns over years, really, like we could see patterns. And then when we knew or we had a good idea that they would come out with a disinformation campaign about X, Y, Z, then what we did is that we were deploying a civilian military team out to meet the local authorities, the population, so on, like a month before the expected disinformation campaign. So what it would create is setting up barriers and more difficult. It created defenses to us, and then, as expectedly, the Russians would come out with disinformation campaign targeting the battle group, the Canadians, whatever. But because of the work we've done a month and a half prior with the population, with the local authorities, and so on, then they would come to our defense and they would call this out openly, saying, no, that's not true, this is a lie. And then the first time, it worked pretty much. The second time, they did not even adjust their tactics. They were still just coming out with the same old stuff. But usually after 2 times, like, it would completely stop. So over the last 5 years, there's been an evolution where it took about a year, 2 years to understand. Then we took action. And after the 3rd year, we saw like a big drop, like no more disinformation targeting economy, no more disinformation targeting the environment, health. So that stopped completely. So this is a way of fighting disinformation, but like moving from being reactive and countering openly disinformation to pre-bunking and enabling the population and the local authorities to fight it on our behalf. So giving them the information to fight.
Thank you very much. I wanted to start with a field experience to set the context. But let me move now to Mrs. Maronkova, who is with NATO headquarters. Mrs. Maronkova, you know you're here, it's a home turf, we are staunch Atlanticists, so you are not going to expect much criticism. We've been very active promoting the transatlanticist agenda. When it came to the issue of the East Flank, we've been, of course, pushing for reinforcement from the beginning. Martin Swarovski, who is our specialist here, has written several reports on ways to implement a reinforcement already 2 or 3 years ago. Now, concretely, what does NATO's reinforcement of the East Flank concretely look like? And what was the substantial impact after the latest NATO summit in Madrid?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you very much. And I'm glad to be in a friendly environment, although I'm used to being also in unfriendly environments. But from zooming out from Latvia and the forests of Latvia up to the glossy headquarters in Brussels, on the both political side, but also on the, let's say, practical side. We do and hear a lot of analysts and opinion formers, editors writing about the 24th of February as the watershed moment for European security or for security overall. From NATO's perspective, digging inside the headquarters, for us, it was more of a culmination of things that we have been seeing, experiencing, and trying to prepare for since 2014 already. Since 2014, both on our relationship with Russia, so no practical cooperation since 2014, trying to have some sort of dialogue through the NATO-Russia Council. I've attended some of them. It was extremely frustrating and boring because it was like talking to a wall, all the way up basically to the fact where exactly a year ago the Russian Ministry of Foreign Affairs sent us a blunt letter saying, you close your office, NATO Information Office, in 2 weeks. And the lucky person who had to do this job was actually me. All the way to the January where we received this request for security guarantees. And then Ambassador Grushko happy to come and have this really a bit weird theatrical NATO-Russia Council in January. So that was one track. The other track, Ukraine. I mean, we have been supporting Ukraine since 2014. Through different means, advisory support, training support, etc., etc. Everybody in this room knows about it, so I will not go into details. And the third level is strengthening of our own deterrence and defense. And as a collective defense organization, that's our biggest job. So that's our key job. Yes, we obviously support Ukraine, we support Moldova, we support Georgia, we do a lot of other things. But the key DNA of NATO is collective defense, and therefore we had to focus on strengthening deterrence defense. I'm not a military expert, I'm a civilian, I'm a bureaucrat, but from what I've been hearing, talking with colleagues over the years, it was pretty much go to the archives, go to the somewhere like 1973 year, open the drawer, get the defense plans out, refresh them, and there you go. How difficult is that, right? Now, the difficult thing was that a lot of the people and experts, the defense planners, have already retired in the meantime, and we had a whole new generation of new military officers in our member states who basically have not been educated in this Cold War mentality. Secondly, it's about the change in technologies and how we do things today, including the modern warfare concept. And the third was, frankly, money and resources. And I remember already the previous Secretary General, NATO Secretary General Anders Fogh Rasmussen, already in those days going around the European capitals and saying, please step up your defense spending. And it has not happened. It has only happened after 2014 with some allies, and it's finally happening with most of the allies. So while on one hand I can go through the whole list of the developments since 2014 on how we were building all our defense, strengthening defense in the East, and we had the Readiness Action Plan, and then we had this Readiness Initiative, and now we have a new force model. I will not bore you with details, you can find it on our website, frankly speaking. But I wanted to give a bit of the more insight, mentality shift and thinking, which did not happen overnight from 23rd to 24th of February, but it's been a culmination of 8 years of hard work, frankly speaking, by our Secretary General, by our military commanders, but also by the member states at different levels. And on the morning of 24th, paradoxically and unfortunately, it all came together, and this is where we are today. So I'll probably leave it at that, perhaps like a big zoom from the, as I say, the high-level headquarters, but happy to go into details later.
Thank you very much, Barbara. Well, as it happens, the Moscow liaison office, it was my former place of work, so you have been dismantling my former desk. It's sad, but we meet in Prague, what can I say? Thank you, Vladimir Putin. Matej, let me move to you, and I would like you to give me a more strategic angle, Visegrad angle, of the issue of strengthening and fortifying the NATO East flank. I know we've been on several panels in the past, so I can guess what you are going to tell us, but these people here don't. So you have 7 minutes, and try to be nice to the Germans.
Okay. All right. Thank you for having me. Well, I like to think about Visegrad Group as a small model of NATO, because you have in the Visegrad Group all the problems which is connected with the NATO itself. Like Poland, they are completely focused on the eastern flank, now even more than ever before, but it is a long-time issue. Hungary, more oriented the southern flank, the issues like migration, extremism, etc. Czechia and Slovakia in between, kind of like black passengers, like, yes, we are members and we are doing what is being tasked from us, more or less, but it's not like a real full commitment and spending, as Barbara mentioned, defense spending wasn't, our strong thing before, and it's not now, to be honest, but we'll speak about it later. And this thing, the war changed, that now we are all Eastern flank, with the exception of Hungary, but that's for another debate. Another thing which war changed for us, as we are completely getting rid of Soviet legacy platforms, weapon systems which were still quite widespread in our militaries, especially I'm speaking for Slovak armed forces. Tanks, all kind of old systems are now going to the Ukraine, and they are being replaced by new Western-made systems. And there is strategic issue for the future, and we need to talk about it, about the production capacities, of the defense industry in NATO, in Europe, in US, because the demand is over the roof, and somebody needs to step up the game in the line of the production. So yes, we are changing all the systems. We have NATO battle group in Slovakia, also in Hungary, which I believe before the invasion I mean, that wasn't even on the table. I mean, it was like a crazy idea. Battle group in Slovakia, Hungary, why? No, not going to happen. And thank Czechia for the leading the battle group in Slovakia. I think it was strategically very good idea to put Czech in a charge, because there was a lot of thinking that Slovak society, which is rather NATO skeptic, how it would react to the presence of the allies on the ground, and having Czechs in the lead was simply the best option for us, and it's working quite well. We are still settling down, but
Are they paying you that you are praising them all the time?
no, I'm trying to be a good guest.
Okay.
Germans, well, again, I would be more on the positive side, to be honest. We have Patriots, air defense system from Germany, also from US, Holland, which now rotated outside of the country, but still it was a huge boost for capabilities of Slovakia. There is agreement with Poland and Czechia again for protection of the sky. So I mean, like, from the perspective of Slovakia, we are the big winner here. Like, we are getting so much, so fast, and I mean, it not deserved in a way that we were so into that all before. But now I'm proud to say the Slovak government is supporting Ukraine in a big way. Also, like the government of Czech Republic and Poland. Again, Hungary is a completely different story, but I think it's not to discuss here and now at this panel, to be sure. And maybe one strategic issue and strategic idea I having in my head for the future, like how the future deterrence of Russia would look like. The first and most important thing is that the gap between Russian and NATO conventional capability is growing, and after the war, when Ukraine will win, because Ukraine will win, the gap will be absolutely huge, because Russian army is being wiped out in Ukraine, right? And that is good news, and also the bad news, because this asymmetry will force Russia to think some more nefarious tactics, way how to use those asymmetry, how it play it against us. And having also like Finland and Sweden, I hopefully soon joining the NATO, it will strategically change the environment in Baltics and Arctics. It's also putting Russia in very different position, and I'm pretty sure that they are thinking hard how they will counter this asymmetry, and we should think about that too deeply, because it will be like the next challenge for the deterrence of the Eastern Flank.
Thank you. Well, very insightful. Let me ask you a more general question. How do you personally, in your field of work, respectively, assess NATO solidarity among the member states? Barbara, I know you would love to to spill the beans.
Well, my answer will clearly not surprise anybody in this room, since I have to go back and I like to keep my job. But no, I mean, I get this question quite often when I discuss with colleagues like yourselves. To be very frank and honest, I mean, when I look at our daily business, and as you know, we take decisions by consensus on every single thing, on all different committee level, all the way to the North Atlantic Council, we do get consensus on the most important issues of the day. It might take a bit to get there. We might need to have revision 12 of a certain document. However, at the end of the day, the consensus comes out. Some might argue, well, this is taking too much time. Some might argue, but this makes the decisions then really strong and hold. That's not for me to discuss, in a sense, whether or not we should be changing this decision-making. But at the end of the day, we do get the agreements out. The same it was on the new strategic concept, which, if you read it, and I hope everybody did in this room.
I did.
I mean, we have some pretty strong language there, which we managed to get in. Perhaps for those who don't follow NATO on a daily business, you might be like, what is she talking about? But for us in the NATO business, every word counts. And I can really assure you that every single word counts, and every single word is negotiated at autumn. So having a strong language on Russia, strong language on China, strong language on deterrence defense, and we really go into nitty-gritties of our deterrence, including nuclear deterrence, in a public document. I think all of this is really quite a shows strong political will. And of course, then going into the military planning and the military side of things, again, at the end of the day, we do get the consensus. So yes, we do have discrepancies, we have disagreements, everybody knows about it, but at the end of the day, we managed to get it all together. So some of you might be critical, saying, why is it taking so long? Why a certain ally is doing this or not doing that? These are political processes, but as you know, we have to get the consensus at the end of the day.
Right. Colonel, let me ask you to be blunt. When you go every day to you sit at your desk and you need to work with allied nations on various issues regarding disinformation, influence operations, countering hybrid threats. I look at you in the eyes. Can you be sure that we have a strong allied force and we are all on the same page in your field of work?
So okay. The first years I've spent in Latvia were the very rewarding but the most frustrating of my career. Like, I would work a crazy amount of hours, and behind closed door I would have the full leadership support, but because we didn't have the proper policies in place and documents and so on, then nothing would be signed officially, but I would be told to go out and about and do my job. But that was me and my career on the line if I was going to do something wrong. So that was very frustrating. This is important to say because since then there's been, just like you said, there's been huge amount of work and consensual work in terms of getting those documents out. The strategic concept is a good example. In 2019, NATO had their first strategic communication directive. And now, with the help of the Stratcom COE, finally we will publish the first ever NATO strategic communication doctrine, which we've never had. Russians had a strategic communication doctrine fully implemented in their planning cycles since the 1960s. And we're still working on publishing our first ever doctrine. So it took, unfortunately, a war to get nations to rally behind the concept of strategic competition, what it means, and realizing that it's more important than ever. So over the last 5 years, I've seen huge increase in terms of cooperation and support. But 5 years ago, that was a hell of a challenge in terms of getting it done. I had the support, informal support. The official one, not so much.
I shouldn't have asked you to be blunt, but gosh, I loved the answer. Mate, I know you've been working the floor in these transatlantic circles, and we've been friends for a long time now. And I know you encounter people you need to discuss, NATO 2%. I mean, we are speaking pre-February 2022. Did you have the feeling that like you were speaking with academics and think tanks, did you have the feeling that they were listening to you when you were asking them why NATO 2% was not happening, why they were not stepping up, and why, let's say, and I assume you told them that NATO solidarity was a must and they should step up?
Well, pretty simple. It was like a lot of nodding, and afterwards a lot of shrugging shoulders. Like, they agree and they know all the arguments, know the routine. You can even have really good debates, like going deeper than just 2%, but how those money should be allocated. What's there for the research and development? What's there for the sustaining the force? What's for acquisitions? Good debates, detailed. But in the end of the day, the question of the expenditures of the spending is absolutely political. And simply the threat perception, especially in Central Europe, with exception of Poland, wasn't there. I mean, the 2014 didn't wake us up. It took the full invasion to wake us up. And I'm a bit skeptical, like how sustainable the defense spending which are now being announced for coming years, how sustainable it will be. Because quite likely there are complicated years for us, speaking from economic perspective, like looming recession, high inflation, etc. And I'm not really sure that all the governments will hold the line and push through for the more defense spending when they will face angry voters who will ask for more butter than guns, right? Mm-hmm. So I would not chip my money very strongly on the fact that this defense spending is now, like this issue is solved and now everyone will spend as needed. I don't think so. Mm-hmm. I'm quite afraid it can go a different way, especially if, for example, Ukraine again will win. Let's say
since Ukraine will win.
Yes, next year. Again, the argument will be very different to sustain the spending. Because people will ask why Russia is down, Russia is weak, now rather spend on something else. So.
All right, well, thank you. This closes our round. Now let me open the floor for questions from the audience. We have a question from Poland. It should come.
Thank you. Filip Bryjka, Polish Institute of International Affairs. During NATO's Madrid summit, NATO decided to upgrade multinational battalion groups to the level of brigade, and at the same time decided to form 4 new battle groups in Slovakia, Hungary, Romania, and Bulgaria. So I have 2 questions regarding this field. First, did you observe the increased number of Russian disinformation operations in this subject, similarly to 2016 when these battle groups were deployed to Baltic states and Poland? I read a number of Stratcom CEO reports on this issue, and at that time Russians were using bots to shape the narrative on these decisions. And the second part of the question, especially addressed to Yves, because of his practical experience, what would you recommend to host nations and the framework nations to do to prevent and mitigate the impact of predicted Russian disinformation campaign? Thanks.
Barbara, you want to take the first part?
Yeah, I can take the first part partially, because then I might need help from my fellow panelists who are tracking it much more in detail than we do at the headquarters. Generally speaking, I don't think we have seen a massive wave of disinformation on the 4 new created battle groups. Maciej will know more from the Slovak perspective. I think it's more of a domestic perhaps issue rather than a kind of orchestrated big Russian disinformation as we experienced with the first 4 battle groups in the EFP. I think the reasons are, as Yves already mentioned earlier, firstly, that we have learned. We are now much better in understanding what we need to do and prepare, and therefore deter, also in the information space. Secondly, I think in some of these 4 nations, the public support for NATO and reinforcement has been very high, and in fact they might be even wanting more. And thirdly, and I don't have any analytical hardcore facts for it, but I think Russia has been slightly distracted since February somewhere else. Doesn't mean they are not still conducting disinformation, but I think not on that level of scale. But overall, I think we still need to be vigilant. We still need to continue our proactive communication, and that what I think we are doing from the headquarters perspective. The high-level visits of the Secretary General, the press conferences, the exercises. I mean, everything we do now in this regard, I think is much more planned, coordinated in terms of Stratcom than we used to do that before. And I think that really shows that if you are proactive, if you know what to expect, if you craft your messages correctly, it can really help. I'm not saying we are perfect, doesn't always work, but I would say we are in a much, much better place than we have been just a few years ago. But other colleagues might have more details.
Mon colonel, your view?
So I'll jump to what to do to prepare. The NATO, in fighting disinformation, they have a twin-track model called Understand and Engage. The Canadians have one that's similar. Almost all nations have one that's similar. So understanding the environment is the first step, and there's a lot of literature out there already. So you read and you try to understand as much as possible the adversary's tactics and procedures in attacking a specific area, group, or so on. And then you keep building on this. Then you need to understand your own vulnerabilities, where your weaknesses are, and you need to start laying defenses to protect them. If you don't know your vulnerabilities, then you're going to be attacked, and it's going to hurt big time. So you need to know them, and you need to protect them. The other thing I would say, I did say pre-bunking earlier, but pre-bunking it's not like a magical formula that works for everything. We still need to answer publicly from time to time. So you need to have a clear understanding of your response workflow. So when is it time to respond to what and so on? This will be linked to your core values, your raison d'être, your vulnerabilities. So simple example in Latvia, the day that the Latvians do not believe in Canadians anymore, if our reputation is gone, that's it, we go home. So anything that is targeting the reputation of the Canadians in Latvia, this is cornerstone to our strategy, our strategic narrative. So every time we're attacked on this, the last time we were, it was during the early phase of COVID. It took 2 hours to have a ministerial statement live on TV within 2 hours of us tracking the disinformation piece on a Russian blog. Then they had a call to this news agency, and they had a legal action taken against them. You remove this, or then we're moving to the next step. Your response workflow has to be clear. How do you do this? You make sure you train. You train. So you build up your capabilities internally, and you make sure you do some scenario, just like the wargaming we did a couple of days ago. This is great. And I would argue every time you have an opportunity to do some wargaming, you do it. You're going to pick up some things that you think are irrelevant, but eventually you're going to start seeing that it's not that irrelevant, because usually those scenarios are based on real life example. So those are few things I would advise on doing.
So since we are live streaming, or we have at least a question coming from the internet, it's one that is not directly related to our topic, but still we could still address. Both China and Russia are increasingly conducting military operations in the Arctic. How should NATO react to Beijing and Moscow's presence in the region? Mate, I'm sure you're burning to answer this question.
No, I'm not. Honestly, I'm not expert on Arctic region, but I know something about Russia, I would say. And I know for Russia, going Arctic was a strategic decision and long-term build of capabilities and presence, as I believe they see a future in Arctic. I mean, with the climate change, and so on and so on, Arctic would be much more accessible for maritime communication, for opening the north route for business, for ships, etc. And I think they were like building their own capabilities to have the presence before everyone else. And I would say it was a smart idea, but I'm not sure if it would do them any good now. As Barbara mentioned, Russia is now deeply engaged elsewhere in Ukraine. I'm not sure that they will get much from the Arctic presence, but I might be wrong.
Colonel, Canada has an Arctic dimension. Any Canadian insight on the issue?
Okay, this is above my my area of responsibilities, but we are extremely active in the Arctic. We're conducting. There's a renewed of studies and investment and so on. So the Northwest Passage, it's not going to happen tomorrow. It's like we're decades away from this, but nonetheless, there are changes going on, and we are conducting a lot of studies, a lot of investments. And right now, the main stream of studies is about China's influence and influence operation in the Arctic. So they are reaching out to a Canadian population living there, and I would love to have the exact study, but I recall reading not too long ago a study about the fact that some of the Arctic Canadian population were now identifying a bit more as Chinese than Canadian. That is the effect of long-term influence operation from China, targeting a specific population in the Arctic. So this is happening. And this is all about understanding our information environment. There's so much to track and look out there that if you don't start looking for this kind of stuff, you will not know, or you will find out when it's too late. So again, it comes back to what are our own vulnerabilities, and then we need to start acting. And I think we're doing this.
Thank you. Well, tell you what, this specific question will be also discussed at the next panel. We have the expert in this regard, who is Anne-Marie Brady, who conducted studies on hybrid warfare and influence operations in the Arctic, Chinese operations. My God, the East Flank is inspiring even questions on Turkey. So here's our second question. Would you please comment on the future of Turkey within NATO? Oh, Barbara, I see you would love this question. Within NATO security architecture, given, for example, their purchasing of Russian SAM or their blocking of Swedish and Finnish NATO access. Is this still the fact? Are they actually blocking?
Well, firstly, Turkey is a NATO member state, and it will stay a NATO member state. End of story. To be very blunt, I mean, that's how it is. Unless someone decides to leave NATO, but so far that's nobody wants to leave NATO, just the opposite way. When it comes to Sweden and Finland and the accession, again, we can play with the words. Often we are, portrayed as spin doctors in the public diplomacy division. So I'll use that prerogative and I'll say that we are in a ratification process, and every country is ratifying at their own speed. So we don't see any blocking. For now. However, no. But to be to put it in a different angle, Turkey has agreed, just as all the other member states in Madrid, to open the accession talks and invite Finland, Sweden. That part is done. Did we have? And particularly our Secretary General have some hard work to do the night before the summit? Yes. Did he personally got very much involved in the negotiations between Sweden, Finland, and Turkey the night before? Yes. As a result, we have a trilateral memorandum between these three countries where they agreed on certain points, and now they are implementing some of these points. I'm not going to be the spokesperson for the Swedish government, but the new Prime Minister was in Ankara earlier this week. You have seen his press conference, what the two countries have agreed. And you have seen our Secretary General last Friday in Ankara as well, with a fairly blunt and strong messages that Finland and Sweden have fulfilled their part. They need to be accepted ASAP, and that the ratification process is ongoing, but nevertheless, it still is basically the fastest ratification we ever had. So again, we don't always have agreement? True. Do we have bilateral issues standing between a member state and a possible new member state? Yes, we do. But let me remind you that this is not new, and we had a certain country blocked for almost 15 years in Southeast Europe based on a bilateral issue. Unfortunately, this is the geopolitical realities, but I don't think anybody doubts that Sweden and Finland will be members of
and
NATO.
And the Russian deliveries, or the purchase?
Well, that one is, to be honest, an old one. This is something which actually led to some of the suspensions of the arms sale of some countries, including Sweden and the United States. Of course, for us as NATO, it's not an easy question. It's a question which has steered a bit the debate. But at the end of the day, whether we like it or not, every country is free to do procurement with whom they want. But I think, again, I'm not a military expert, but from what I understood from those people who actually really understand these matters, the previous batteries that were purchased actually were really minimal pieces, and they couldn't, in a great way, affect the Patriots that Turkey has by Alanya. So, but again, this is not to diminish the problem, but sometimes I feel that the media and the political messaging sometimes greatly inflates the issue than it in reality might actually be. But again, this is what I was told by some military experts. I might be wrong.
Just a brief comment on this, because yes, there have been some frustration with Turkey because their assertivity in the region and their footprint in Nagorno-Karabakh war, in Syria, in Libya, is significant, and it's, I think, not every time in the interest of the rest of the allies, but that's their national interest as they see it, as Erdogan likely see it. But if you look at the map, just simply where the Turkey is, how it's big, the strategic importance of Turkey is simply there. And we should ask ourselves, okay, it's frustrating, but we are better off with Turkey in NATO or with Turkey outside of the NATO. That's the question for us.
Thank you. Questions? Yes, please. Can you name your affiliation?
Thank you. Thank you. Valery Bojan from the Embassy of Romania. If you look to the Eastern Flank, begin at Baltic Sea and ends at the Black Sea, don't you think that a long period the southern section of the Eastern Flank was neglected, at least until 24 February this year?
Even after... you're a diplomat, right?
Yes.
Yeah. You are not a diplomat.
No. I think you're absolutely right. The southern part of the Eastern Flank was a blind spot for a very long time, and I even see it from my perspective as we are having these all the conferences, seminars, discussions. We are all the time focused Baltics, Central Europe, sometimes some Romania and broader Black Sea region. And as on like the expert, the think tankish side, but also in the academia and with the policymakers. I think we simply don't talk to each other enough to have your concerns, your perspective in our heads, because we are looking elsewhere. And it's a mistake, and I think we should work much more on it.
Other questions? No? Well, let's call it a day. Thank you very much for a very insightful round. And I hope we will continue to discuss these issues in the future. And I think we make a great team. Maybe we could get some jobs at NATO. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you very much.